A man's greatest gamble isn't in the boardroom. It's the one he makes on his wife's silence. For Ethan Blackwood, tonight was the ultimate bet. He was walking into the most important gala of his career, held at the opulent Grand Serafina Hotel, with his beautiful young mistress Sophia on his arm. His wife Eleanor was at home, a forgotten piece of a life he was eager to upgrade. He believed he was the king of his own world, the master of his destiny. But what happens when the castle you're showing off doesn't belong to you? What happens when your quiet, unassuming wife holds the keys to the entire kingdom? Stay with me, because this isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a tale of a spectacular downfall, where the truth arrives in a designer gown and changes everything in a single heartbeat. The Blackwood residence in the manicured suburbs of Chestnut Hill was a monument to modern ambition. It was a house of clean lines, cold marble, and vast panes of glass that looked out onto a perfectly landscaped yet sterile garden. It was Ethan's pride and joy, a tangible symbol of his ascent. He was Ethan Blackwood, Senior Vice President at Innovate Dynamics, a man who by all outward appearances had meticulously crafted a perfect life. Tonight, the silence in the cavernous dining room was heavier than usual. Ethan adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke tuxedo, the fabric a whisper of expensive silk. Across the polished mahogany table, his wife Eleanor Vance picked at her salad. She was beautiful in a way he had stopped noticing, like a piece of classical art that becomes mere wallpaper over time. Her grace was quiet, her intelligence subtle. In the early years of their marriage, he had found that quietness alluring, a calm harbor for his raging ambition. Now he just found it dull. "You're sure you don't want to come?" He asked the question, a mere formality, a box to be ticked on the checklist of feigning concern. "It's the Vanguard Awards. It's a big night for the company." Eleanor looked up, her eyes the color of a stormy sea, holding a flicker of something he couldn't decipher. Sadness. Resignation. "I told you, Ethan. I have that deadline for the library proposal." Besides, she added, a small, sad smile touching her lips, "these events aren't really for me. You shine so brightly I'd just be in your shadow." He pretended internally at her words, taking them as the compliment they were intended to be. It was true. He did shine. He was dynamic, charismatic, a shark in a world of minnows. Eleanor, with her love for old books, architectural sketches, and quiet evenings, was an anchor. A lovely, respectable anchor, but an anchor nonetheless. "All right, darling. Just don't work too hard," he said, his tone dismissive. He stood up, grabbing the keys to his Jaguar from the crystal bowl by the door. "I'll probably be late. Lots of networking to do. Harrison is expecting me to close the deal with the Japanese investors tonight." "Of course," she said softly, her gaze dropping back to her plate. "Be brilliant." He didn't see the way her hand trembled slightly as she placed her fork down. He didn't notice that her plate was still full. He was already gone, his mind miles away, buzzing with anticipation. He wasn't just thinking about the investors or the award he was certain he would win. He was thinking of Sophia. Sophia Jensen. She was 26, a firecracker in the marketing department at Innovate Dynamics. She was all vibrant energy, ambitious hunger, and wide-eyed admiration for him. She saw him not as the man who sometimes forgot to take out the recycling, but as the titan of industry he saw himself as. She made him feel like the man he was supposed to be, not the man who had married the quiet, unassuming daughter of a moderately successful architect. He had told Sophia his marriage was a hollow shell, a prison of polite obligation. He painted Eleanor as a passionless, unsupportive woman who was content to live off his success without contributing anything to his drive, and Sophia, enamored and ambitious herself, believed every word. As he drove away from the silent, glass-walled house, his phone buzzed. A message from Sophia. "Can't wait to see you, superstar. I'm wearing a red dress, the one you love." A genuine smile, the first of the evening, spread across Ethan's face. He pressed the accelerator, leaving his old life behind in the rearview mirror, speeding toward the glittering promise of the new. He felt no guilt. He felt only the exhilarating, intoxicating thrill of having it all. He was Ethan Blackwood, and tonight the world was his to conquer. He had a brilliant career, a beautiful mistress, and a stable, quiet wife at home. It was in his mind, the perfect arrangement, a testament to his own cleverness. He had no idea that the foundation of his perfect world was built on sand, and the tide was about to come in. Sophia Jensen was waiting for him in the lobby of the Langham, a boutique hotel downtown where they always met. When she stood up, the red dress was everything he had imagined. It was a slash of crimson against the muted tones of the lobby, a bold statement of intent. It clung to her curves, a siren's call that made heads turn. Her blonde hair was styled in glamorous waves, and her smile was dazzling. She looked like she belonged in the spotlight. "Wow," Ethan breathed, his appreciation genuine. "You look like a movie star." "I wanted to look perfect for your big night," she said, her voice a seductive purr. She looped her arm through his. "Are you ready to blow them all away?" "With you on my arm. They won't know what hit them." He boasted, his ego swelling. This was the part of the fantasy he loved most. With Sophia, he was reborn. He wasn't just a husband playing a role. He was a powerful, desirable man, taking what he wanted. He had spun a meticulous web of lies to keep his two worlds separate. To Sophia, Eleanor was a cold, distant figure who hadn't shared his bed in years. He'd told her they were staying together for appearances until a large trust fund, supposedly in Eleanor's name, matured. He'd even hinted that a divorce was on the horizon, a future where he and Sophia could be together, openly and triumphantly. "I still can't believe we're doing this," Sophia whispered as they settled into the back of the limousine he'd hired for the night. "Walking into a company gala together. Isn't it risky?" "The biggest risks have the biggest rewards," he said smoothly, quoting a line he'd used in a board meeting last week. "Tonight is about power. It's about showing them who I am. And you," he said, tilting her chin up, "are part of that. You're not some secret Sophia. You're my future." Her eyes shone with a mixture of adoration and ambition. She saw her own star, rising hitched to his wagon. She was no fool. She knew dating a senior VP was a shortcut up the corporate ladder, but she'd convinced herself it was more than that. It was love. Ethan had a way of making you believe his reality. The limousine pulled up to the curb outside the Grand Serafina Hotel. It was a landmark of old-world luxury, its stone facade illuminated by golden floodlights. Liveried doormen rushed to open their doors. The air buzzed with the energy of the city's elite. Photographers' flashes popped on the red carpet, capturing the arrival of tech moguls, city council members, and financial titans. "This is incredible." Sophia breathed, her hand tightening on his arm. "I've only ever seen this place in magazines." "Get used to it," Ethan said, his voice brimming with confidence. "This is our world now." He guided her onto the red carpet, a proprietary hand on the small of her back. He posed for a few photos, enjoying the attention. He introduced Sophia to a few junior colleagues, deliberately avoiding senior management for now. He introduced her simply as Sophia, letting the implication hang in the air. He wanted whispers. He wanted speculation. It was all part of the power play. Tonight was his coronation, and he wanted everyone to see the queen he had chosen. Inside the ballroom was a breathtaking spectacle of crystal and gold. A string quartet played softly on a dais, chandeliers the size of small cars, dripped diamonds of light, and waiters in crisp uniforms moved through the throng with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Everyone who was anyone in the city's tech and finance scene was there. Ethan grabbed 2 glasses of champagne. To us, he toasted, clinking his glass against hers. And to a future without shadows. Sophia smiled, her eyes sparkling. "I'll drink that." As they mingled, Ethan felt a supreme sense of control. He was the master puppeteer, and everyone was dancing to his tune. He saw his boss, CEO David Harrison, across the room holding court. He'd go and pay his respects later, once he'd made a sufficient splash. He saw his main rival for the upcoming COO position, Mark Croft, glaring at him from across the room. Mark's date was his wife of 20 years, a pleasant but plain-looking woman. Ethan smirked. Mark played by the old rules. Ethan Blackwood was writing new ones. He felt a tap on his shoulder and turned. It was a mid-level manager from another department. "Ethan." "Good to see you," the man said, his eyes flicking curiously to Sophia. "Big night for you. I hear the Vanguard Award is a lock." "We'll see, Mark. Just happy to be here, celebrating the company's success," Ethan replied with practiced humility. He was on top of the world. Everything was going exactly to plan. He had the perfect job, the perfect mistress, and the perfect cover story. His wife was at home sketching her boring building designs, completely oblivious. In his meticulously constructed world, there were no variables he hadn't accounted for, no risks he hadn't mitigated. He was invincible. For the next hour, Ethan was in his element. He moved through the gilded ballroom like a shark navigating familiar waters. Sophia, a beautiful crimson remora, at his side. He introduced her with a casual intimacy that was far more damning than any official title. "This is Sophia," he would say, and the knowing glances and raised eyebrows from his colleagues only fueled his arrogance. He was flouting convention, and it felt exhilarating. He made a point of speaking with the Japanese investors he'd mentioned to Eleanor. They were older, more traditional men, and he could see a flicker of surprise in their eyes as he introduced Sophia, his special project manager. But Ethan's pitch was so slick, his numbers so compelling, that their professionalism soon overrode any personal judgment. He walked away from the conversation, confident he had sealed the multi-million-dollar deal. "You were amazing," Sophia whispered, her eyes wide with admiration. "You just commanded that entire conversation." "It's what I do," Ethan said with a shrug, though his chest puffed out. He finally spotted his boss, David Harrison, standing near the grand staircase. Harrison was a stern, no-nonsense CEO who valued results above all else. This was the moment Ethan had been building towards. He took Sophia's hand and strode towards him. David Ethan said, his voice smooth as silk. "Good evening. Wonderful event." Harrison turned his eyes sharp as a hawk's took in the scene, Ethan's confident smirk, Sophia's dazzling dress, their joined hands. A strange, unreadable expression crossed Harrison's face. It wasn't disapproval, not exactly. It was more like pity. Blackwood Harrison said, his voice flat. He gave Sophia a brief, almost dismissive nod. "Enjoying the evening immensely, We were just celebrating the successful chat with our friends from Tokyo. Ethan said, fishing for a compliment. Good Harrison said, his gaze drifting over Ethan's shoulder towards the grand entrance of the ballroom. There are a lot of important people here tonight. Make sure you're on your best behavior. The comment was oddly paternalistic, and it pricked Ethan's ego. Always am, David. Always am. Harrison didn't reply. He just gave another one of those strange, searching looks and turned back to his conversation. Ethan felt a flicker of unease. Harrison's reaction wasn't what he'd expected. He'd anticipated a grudging respect, perhaps a roguish man-to-man acknowledgement of Sophia's beauty. Instead, he got a warning. He shook it off. Harrison was an old-school dinosaur. He probably couldn't comprehend a man of Ethan's caliber living life on his own terms. His rival Mark Croft wasn't so subtle. He approached them near the champagne fountain, his own wife trailing nervously behind him. Well, well, Blackwood Mark began, a sneer playing on his lips. You certainly have a knack for aggressive expansion in all areas of the business. He let his eyes linger pointedly on Sophia. Sophia flushed her grip on Ethan's arm, tightening. Ethan's jaw clenched. Careful, Mark. Ethan said, his voice dangerously low. You wouldn't want to be made redundant before the big promotion announcement. It would be a shame to lose your pension. Mark's face paled. It was a low blow, but effective. He muttered an excuse and shuffled away, his wife throwing a sympathetic glance back at Sophia. What a jerk, Sophia seethed. Don't worry about him. He's a fly. I'm the windshield, Ethan said, his confidence restored by the small victory. He led her to a small, secluded balcony overlooking the city. The night air was cool, and the skyline glittered like a carpet of scattered jewels. This was the life he deserved. The power, the prestige, the beautiful woman by his side. Everything was perfect. It's beautiful out here, Sophia said, leaning against the balustrade. Ethan, what you said to that man about the future. Were you serious? Of course I was, he said, pulling her close. He looked into her hopeful eyes and sold the lie with the practiced ease of a master. Once this promotion to COO is official, everything changes. I'll have the capital and the security to finally break free. You and me, Sophia, against the world. She melted against him, her doubts erased by the sweet poison of his promises. As he held her, looking back into the glittering ballroom, he felt a surge of triumph. He saw the world not as it was, but as a reflection of his own greatness. Every person in that room was a supporting character in his story, a stepping stone on his path. He was the king, and this was his castle. He was so caught up in the grandeur of the illusion that he failed to recognize the hollowness at its core. He didn't build this castle. He hadn't paid for a single stone. And he had no idea the real owner was about to arrive. The evening was reaching its crescendo. The dinner service had concluded, and David Harrison was now on the main stage, preparing to announce the recipient of the Vanguard Award, the highest honor for leadership and innovation at the company. A palpable buzz filled the room. Ethan stood with Sophia near the front, his posture radiating a confident expectation. He'd already prepared a mental draft of his acceptance speech. And now David Harrison's voice boomed through the speakers. Before we present our main award, we have a very special acknowledgement to make. This magnificent hotel, the Grand Serafina, has been a partner of our gala for over a decade. Tonight we are incredibly honored to have the owner with us in person. He is a titan of industry, a philanthropist, and a man whose vision has shaped much of this city's skyline, though he often prefers to remain behind the scenes. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in offering a warm welcome to Mr. Alistair Vance. Ethan's ears perked up. Vance. The name was the same as Eleanor's maiden name, but he dismissed it as a coincidence. Vance was a common enough name. Still, he was intrigued. He had always wondered who owned the notoriously private Grand Serafina portfolio. This was a networking opportunity of a lifetime. He subtly adjusted his tie, preparing to make an impression. A hush fell over the crowd as all heads turned towards the grand entrance. The ornate double doors, which had been closed, were slowly pulled open by two uniformed attendants. For a moment, the doorway was empty, building suspense. Then a man stepped through. He was in his late 60s with a mane of silver hair and a presence that commanded attention without a single word. He wore a simple, exquisitely tailored charcoal suit that made every other tuxedo in the room look like a cheap rental. His face was etched with the lines of quiet authority and sharp intelligence. This was Alistair Vance. Ethan felt a jolt of pure, unadulterated ambition. He had to meet this man. But then Mr. Vance paused in the doorway and extended his hand back into the shadowed foyer. A moment later, a woman stepped into the light, taking his arm. Time seemed to slow down. The murmur of the crowd, the distant clink of glasses, the soft music from the quartet, it all faded into a dull, roaring sound in Ethan's ears. The woman was Eleanor. It was his wife, but it was a version of her he had never seen before. She was not the quiet, mousy woman in sensible cardigans he had left at home. She was wearing a breathtaking gown of midnight blue silk that shimmered under the chandeliers, cut in a classic, elegant style that screamed bespoke couture. Her hair, usually tied in a simple bun, was styled in a sophisticated chignon, with a few loose tendrils framing her face. Diamonds glittered at her ears and throat, not ostentatious, but with the deep, fiery brilliance of real quality. But it wasn't the dress or the diamonds that struck Ethan like a physical blow. It was her expression. The hesitant, apologetic smile was gone. In its place was a look of serene, unshakable confidence. She held her head high, her posture perfect. She wasn't in anyone's shadow. She was the source of the light, and she was on the arm of Alistair Vance, her father. The pieces of the puzzle pieces Ethan had been too arrogant to even notice slammed into place with brutal, sickening force. Eleanor's moderately successful architect father, her quiet trips to visit her dad, the way she never, ever worried about money, even when he'd been a junior analyst, her maiden name. Vance. A wave of nausea washed over him. He felt the blood drain from his face. Beside him, Sophia stiffened. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice laced with confusion. "Who is that? She looks like—" Ethan couldn't speak. His throat was a desert. The crowd, which had been silent in awe, began to whisper. The whispers grew into a wave of murmurs, spreading through the ballroom like fire through dry grass. People who knew Ethan, who knew his wife, were turning to stare, their faces a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning, delicious scandal. Alistair Vance, with Eleanor on his arm, began to walk slowly into the room. They didn't look at the crowd. They didn't look at the stage. Their eyes were fixed on one person. They were looking directly at Ethan Blackwood. Ethan felt 1,000 pairs of eyes on him. He felt Mark Croft's stare, now filled not with envy but with pure, unadulterated schadenfreude. He felt David Harrison's gaze from the stage, that look of pity, finally making a horrifying kind of sense. He looked from the radiant, powerful woman who was his wife to the terrified, confused girl in the red dress beside him. And in that moment, the floor of his borrowed castle didn't just crack. It disintegrated into dust, plunging him into a free fall with no end in sight. The king was naked, and everyone could see. The walk from the entrance to where Ethan stood felt like an eternity. For Ethan, each step Alistair and Eleanor took was a hammer blow against the fragile structure of his life. The whispers in the ballroom were now a low, predatory hum. Sophia had taken a half step away from him, her hand no longer on his arm, a dawning horror in her eyes as she began to connect the dots. Alistair Vance stopped a few feet in front of them. His calm, assessing gaze swept over Ethan, then lingered for a cold, dismissive moment on Sophia and her bright red dress. There was no anger in his eyes, just a profound, chilling disappointment. It was the look of a man observing an insect. Eleanor, however, looked directly at her husband. Her expression was not one of rage or hysteria. It was one of crystalline clarity, as if she were seeing him for the first time, stripped of all the illusions he had so carefully constructed. "Eleanor." Ethan stammered, his voice a hoarse croak. What is this? What are you doing here?" A small, humorless smile touched Eleanor's lips. "I should ask you the same thing, Ethan, though I suppose the answer is rather obvious." Her eyes flicked to Sophia, a glance so sharp and quick it was like a paper cut. Sophia visibly flinched and looked at Ethan, her face pale with confusion and betrayal. "Ethan, who is this?" Before Ethan could formulate a lie, Alistair Vance spoke. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority, cutting through the surrounding whispers and silencing the room. "This," he said, his gaze locking onto Ethan's, "is my daughter, Eleanor Vance Blackwood." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. The scandal was no longer a matter of speculation. It was a confirmed 5-act drama, playing out in the center of the ballroom. Your daughter," Sophia whispered, turning to Ethan, her world tilting on its axis. "You told me her father was an architect. You said she had no money." Ethan's mind was a maelstrom of panic. It's complicated." He managed the words, sounding pathetic even to his own ears. "No, it's not complicated at all," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a steely quiet. "It's actually very simple. Let me clarify a few things for you, Mr. Blackwood, because you seem to operate under a series of rather profound misconceptions." He took a step closer. "Misconception number 1. That you are a self-made man." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I founded a venture capital firm 30 years ago. One of my first and most successful seed investments was in a promising little tech startup. You might have heard of it. It's called Innovate Dynamics." The blood in Ethan's veins turned to ice. He looked past Alistair to the stage where David Harrison stood with a grim, funereal expression. Harrison knew. Of course he knew. He knew who signed his checks. "Through my holding company, the Vance Group, I retain a 68% majority stake in this company." Alistair continued, his voice relentless. "David Harrison is an excellent CEO, but he works for me, which means, Ethan, that for the past 12 years, you have also worked for me." A sick, wrenching feeling churned in Ethan's stomach. His promotions, his bonuses, his meteoric rise. Had it all been orchestrated? A gilded cage he had mistaken for a throne. Misconception. Number 2. Alistair went on, his tone becoming even colder. That you are a wealthy man. The house in Chestnut Hill. My wedding gift to my daughter. The Jaguar you drive, a birthday present for my daughter. The stock portfolio that gives you your swagger at the country club. It was transferred from a trust I set up. For my daughter. You are not a wealthy man, Ethan. You are a man who has been living on my daughter's allowance. Each word was a precise, devastating blow. The life he had built, the success he had claimed as his own, was a sham. A carefully curated experience provided by the very family he had scorned. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice clear and strong, devoid of the hesitation he was so used to. I asked my father to help you, Ethan. In the beginning. I believed in you. I believed in your ambition. I thought if I gave you a foundation, you would build something wonderful for us. She looked at him, and for the first time he saw not a quiet wife, but a formidable woman. I was content to be in the background. I was happy to let you have the spotlight. I thought your happiness would be our happiness. But I was wrong. You didn't want a partner. You wanted an audience. And when my quiet support wasn't enough, you found a new one. Her gaze fell on Sophia again, but this time it held a sliver of pity. He told you I was passionless, didn't he? That our marriage was a prison of obligation, that I was holding him back from his brilliant destiny. Sophia, looking utterly lost, could only nod mutely, tears welling in her eyes. That's his story, Eleanor said. The truth is, my greatest passion was my misplaced faith in him. The only prison was the one he built for himself with his own lies. And the only thing I was holding back, she finished, her voice ringing with newfound power, was the consequences. Alistair Vance delivered the final fatal blow. Your employment at Innovate Dynamics is terminated effective immediately. Your company credit cards have been cancelled. The keys to the house and the car, which are in my daughter's name, will be collected by my security team tomorrow morning. You will be escorted from this building now. He gestured subtly, and 2 large men in dark suits, who had been standing discreetly by the doors, began to move towards them. Ethan stood there, stripped bare, in front of the entire world he had tried so desperately to impress. He was not a king. He was not a shark. He was a fraud. A court jester who had been allowed to wear a paper crown for a little too long, and the true monarch had finally arrived to end the charade. The fallout was instantaneous and brutal. As the 2 security men approached, a path cleared around Ethan as if he were carrying a contagious disease. Former colleagues averted their gazes, their expressions ranging from pity to contempt. Mark Croft, his rival, wore a look of undisguised, triumphant glee. Sophia was the first to desert the sinking ship. The reality of the situation crashed down on her. She wasn't the chosen partner of a powerful executive, but the disposable mistress of a kept man. The future he had promised her was a fantasy built on someone else's money. Humiliation and anger warred on her face. You lied to me, she hissed at Ethan, her voice trembling with rage. You lied about everything. Without another word, she turned and fled, pushing her way through the gawking crowd, her red dress a beacon of her own public shaming. She disappeared out the doors, leaving Ethan completely and utterly alone. One of the security guards, a large man with an impassive face, reached Ethan. "Sir, you need to come with us." His voice was polite but unyielding. Ethan's mind was still reeling, unable to process the speed and totality of his own destruction. He looked desperately at Eleanor, a primal instinct to plead for taking over. "Ellie, please," he begged, using the pet name from their early happier days. "We can talk about this. This is a mistake." Eleanor looked at him, and her face was a mask of calm. The woman he thought he knew, the woman who would have cried and forgiven him in the past, was gone forever. "No, Ethan," she said, her voice steady. "The mistake was my 16-year investment in you. The return has been disappointing. There is nothing left to talk about." Her finality was more devastating than any shouted insult. It was the sound of a door being closed, locked and barricaded. As the guards gently but firmly took his arms, he saw his boss, David Harrison, approaching Alistair and Eleanor. Harrison bowed his head slightly to Alistair. "Mr. Vance, I'm so sorry you had to witness this." "It's not your fault," David Alistair replied calmly. "The trash has simply taken itself out." The insult delivered so casually was the final twist of the knife. Ethan was no longer a person to them. He was a piece of refuse to be disposed of. The walk out of the ballroom was the longest and most shameful journey of his life. Every eye was on him. He could hear the frantic whispering, the stifled laughter. He was the evening's entertainment, a cautionary tale that would be told for years to come. The man who flew too close to the sun, only to find out the sun was owned by his wife's father. They didn't take him out the grand entrance. They led him through a side door down a service corridor that smelled of disinfectant and boiled vegetables, and out into a cold, dark alley. The contrast with the opulence of the ballroom was dizzying. One moment he was sipping vintage champagne, the next he was standing next to a dumpster. "A taxi has been called for you, sir." One of the guards said his duty done. Then they turned and went back inside the service door, clicking shut behind them, leaving him alone in the alley. He stood there in his $1,000 tuxedo, his whole body trembling with a mixture of shock, rage, and a profound, terrifying emptiness. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting a message from Sophia, either angry or desperate. But it was a series of automated emails. "Innovate Dynamics corporate account access revoked. American Express Platinum business card deactivated. Building security key, fob access to Chestnut Hill residence rescinded." The efficiency of his erasure was breathtaking. Alistair Vance hadn't just fired him. He had unplugged him from the life he had known. A yellow cab pulled up to the end of the alley. Ethan got in the worn fabric of the seat, a stark contrast to the plush leather of the limo he'd arrived in. "Where to?" Buddy the driver asked, not even glancing back. And for the first time, Ethan Blackwood had no answer. He had no home to go to. He had no job to wake up for. The woman he claimed to love had abandoned him, and the woman he had abandoned had just demolished him. He stared out the window at the glittering city lights, the same lights that had looked like his kingdom just an hour ago. Now they just seemed to mock him, cold and distant stars, in a universe that no longer cared that he existed. The unraveling was complete. He was nothing. 6 months later, the spring sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of a corner office on the 54th floor of the Vance Group headquarters. The view was panoramic, a god's-eye perspective of the city skyline that Alistair Vance had helped to shape. But Alistair wasn't in the main chair today. He was sitting in one of the visitors' chairs, watching his daughter. Eleanor Vance stood before a large drafting table. Her brow furrowed in concentration as she made a minute adjustment to a complex architectural blueprint with a stylus. Gone were the quiet cardigans and the air of hesitant apology. She wore a sharply tailored navy blue pantsuit, her hair cut in a chic professional bob. She radiated an energy that was both calm and commanding. The blueprints on the table were for the Vance Center for the Arts, a new philanthropic project that was her brainchild. She was not just the benefactor. She was the lead architect, a role she had earned with a portfolio of brilliant anonymous design competition entries she'd worked on during the lonely nights of her marriage. "The load-bearing calculations for the central atrium are still not quite right," she murmured, more to herself than to her father. "I want the glass ceiling to feel like it's floating, but the engineering has to be flawless." Alistair smiled a genuine, proud smile. "If anyone can make it float, Eleanor, it's you." She looked up and returned his smile. The sadness that had lingered in her eyes for years was gone, replaced by the clear light of purpose. The scandal of the Vanguard Awards Gala had been the talk of the town for weeks, but Eleanor had weathered it with a grace that silenced all gossip. She hadn't reveled in Ethan's downfall. She had simply moved forward, stepping into the power that had always been hers, but which she had been afraid to claim. Her divorce from Ethan had been swift and brutally simple. With a prenuptial agreement as ironclad as one of Alistair's contracts and the blatant public infidelity, Ethan had no leverage. He walked away with nothing but the clothes on his back and a mountain of debt from the lavish lifestyle he could no longer afford. The doorbell to the office chimed, and Alistair's assistant, a kind woman named Maria, poked her head in. "Miss Vance, your 11 o'clock is here." "Thank you, Maria. Send him in." A young, nervous-looking man in a slightly too large suit walked in, clutching a portfolio. He was one of the finalists for the junior architect position on her team. Eleanor greeted him warmly, her confidence putting him immediately at ease. She was no longer just a Vance by name. She was a leader, a mentor. As she began the interview, Alistair quietly slipped out of the office, leaving her to her new life, the one she was building on her own foundation. Meanwhile, across town in a cramped cubicle at a third-rate insurance firm, a man named Ethan was on the phone trying to sell a life insurance policy to an uninterested retiree. His voice had lost its charismatic boom. It was now tinged with the weary desperation of a man who had seen the top and was now living at the bottom. He had tried to find another high-powered job, but the story of his spectacular humiliation had followed him. No one in the city's elite circles would touch him. He was a pariah, a living punchline. He now lived in a small, dingy apartment, his fine suits replaced by off-the-rack polyester. Sometimes, late at night, he would scroll through financial news websites, a masochistic ritual of seeing the world he had lost. Today, an article caught his eye. It was from the city's architectural journal. The headline read, "Eleanor Vance unveils visionary design for new arts center." There was a picture of her standing in front of a stunning model of her building, looking powerful, happy, and radiant. She was everything he had once falsely claimed to be. He stared at the photo for a long time, a hollow ache in his chest. He finally understood. He had thought her silence was weakness, her support a given. He had seen her as a part of his story's background. He realized now that he had never even been the main character in his own life. He was just a temporary resident in hers, a flawed early draft in a story that was always truly about Eleanor Vance. He closed the browser, the bright image of her success burning behind his eyes, and picked up the phone to make another cold call. The line at the other end just rang and rang. The life of Ethan Blackwood had shrunk to the size of a single, sparsely furnished room in a run-down apartment complex in a forgotten part of the city. The panoramic views of Chestnut Hill were replaced by a grimy window that overlooked a brick wall, The scent of Eleanor's fresh orchids was a ghost chased away by the lingering smell of stale coffee and desperation. His world was no longer measured in stock market gains and successful acquisitions, but in the number of rejections he faced per day. He had lost the tailored suits, the Jaguar, the respect. But the hardest thing he lost was the reflection of the man he thought he was. Without the external validation, the praise, the envy of others, he was forced to look at himself, and he did not like what he saw. He saw a hollow man, a parasite, who had mistaken the host's lifeblood for his own. His days at the insurance firm were a monotonous purgatory. He read from a script, his once commanding voice, now a dull drone trying to convince strangers to prepare for a future he himself had utterly failed to secure. He was surrounded by people he once would have considered beneath his notice, people who were now his peers. They were not unkind, but they kept their distance. The story of his downfall was an urban legend in the city's business circles, and even at this low rung of the corporate ladder, the whispers had followed him. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, during his lunch break, he was huddled under the awning of a coffee shop, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee. He was watching the rain sluice down the dirty pavement when he saw her. It was Sophia Jensen. She was walking briskly, sharing an umbrella with another woman, both of them laughing at something on a phone. The vibrant red dress was gone, replaced by a sensible, stylish trench coat and practical boots. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. She looked different. She looked real. The ambition and adoration that had once been plastered on her face were gone, replaced by a calm, self-possessed confidence. For a moment, Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. A wild, foolish hope flared within him. She was the only other person who had been in the center of the storm with him. Maybe she would understand. Maybe they could. He took a step forward out from under the awning and called her name. Sophia. She stopped and turned. Her laughter died as she saw him. Her friend looked from Ethan's haggard face and ill-fitting coat to Sophia, her expression questioning. For a few seconds, Sophia's face was a blank canvas. Then recognition dawned, followed by something he hadn't expected. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was a cool, dispassionate pity, the kind one might feel for a stray dog. "Ethan," she said, her voice even. There was no trace of the breathless admiration he was used to. I just wanted to see how you were," he stammered, feeling foolish under her steady gaze. "I'm fine," she said. It wasn't a platitude, it was a simple statement of fact. I transferred out of the main branch. "I'm in the San Francisco office now. It's a better fit." "Oh," he said, the single word sounding inadequate. "Good. That's good for you." She gave a small, tight smile. "It is. I learned a valuable lesson that night. Never hitch your wagon to a shooting star, especially when you don't know who owns the sky." The metaphor was sharp, and it hit its mark. I'm building my own career now, on my own merits. It's slower, but it's real. Her friend tugged gently on her arm. "Sophia, we're going to be late." "Right." She looked at Ethan one last time. "Goodbye, Ethan. I hope you figure things out." And with that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. She didn't look back. Ethan stood in the rain, the coffee in his hand, now cold, watching her go. He had expected a scene, a confrontation, perhaps even a sliver of shared victimhood. Instead, He got closure, her closure, not his. She had processed the humiliation, learned from it, and moved on. Her life was continuing its upward trajectory, albeit on a different path. He had simply stopped frozen on the night of the gala. He had told her she was his future, but he had only ever been a detour for her, a costly mistake she had already corrected. He was a chapter in her book, a chapter she had already finished reading. He, on the other hand, was stuck on the same page, reading the story of his own failure over and over again, an echo in an empty room. That evening he went back to his apartment, ignored the stack of final notice bills on his counter, and for the first time since that night, he wept. They were not tears of self-pity, but tears of a terrifying, profound loneliness. He had finally been seen for what he was, and the world had collectively decided to look away. Eleanor Vance stood on the wind-swept raw earth of the construction site, a hard hat perched on her head. Around her, the skeleton of the Vance Center for the Arts was beginning to rise, a testament of steel and concrete to a future she was actively creating. The chaos of construction, the roar of machinery, the shouts of workers, the clang of metal on metal, was music to her. It was the sound of progress, the sound of something new being born from nothing. Her life was now a carefully balanced structure of her own design. Her days were filled with meetings, site visits, and long productive hours at the drafting table. She had found her voice not just in boardrooms, but in the elegant, functional lines of her designs. She was no longer Eleanor Vance Blackwood, the quiet wife. She was Eleanor Vance, the architect. Her work had attracted attention. Samuel Reed, a notoriously sharp architectural critic for the New York Standard, had initially written a skeptical piece about the project, dismissing it as a potential vanity project for a billionaire's daughter. Instead of issuing a press release, Eleanor had invited him to her office. For 2 hours, she walked him through every blueprint, every 3D model, explaining her philosophy. The interplay of light and space, the commitment to sustainable materials. Samuel, a man known for his acerbic wit, had been silenced by her passion and undeniable talent. He left her office looking thoughtful, and his follow-up article was a glowing retraction. It praised her visionary synthesis of classical form and modern functionality. He became an unlikely ally, and over time, a friend. They would have lunch once a month, their conversations filled with spirited debates about architecture, art, and the city they both loved. He saw her not for her name or her past, but for the brilliance of her mind. It was a partnership of equals, something she had never truly experienced before. One evening, as she was packing her briefcase to go home, her assistant handed her a small stack of mail. Tucked between industry magazines and invitations to charity events was a plain white envelope. There was no return address, but she recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Ethan's. Her first instinct was to throw it away unopened. What could he possibly have to say that would matter now? But a different, calmer part of her, the part that had designed atriums and calculated load-bearing weights, was curious. Not with emotion, but with an engineer's desire to understand a completed failed structure. She sat down at her desk, the city lights beginning to twinkle outside her window, and opened it. The letter was 2 pages long, written on cheap-lined paper. It was not the confident, arrogant scrawl of the man she had married, but the shaky, desperate script of a broken man. He wrote of his loneliness, of the crushing weight of his new reality. He apologized not with the smooth, manipulative charm of his past, but with a raw, ugly honesty. He admitted he had never truly seen her. that he had been blinded by his own reflection in the mirror of success she and her father had provided. He didn't ask for forgiveness, nor did he ask for a second chance. He asked for one thing. "I just need to know the last line, read. Was any of it real to you? Did you ever love the man you thought I was?" Eleanor read the letter twice. A year ago, these words would have torn her apart, validating her pain, but also reopening old wounds. Now she felt a profound sense of distance. She was reading about two people she no longer knew, the arrogant man he had been, and the quiet, hopeful woman who had loved him. Both were ghosts. She thought about his question. Did she love him? Yes, she had. Desperately. But she had been in love with a blueprint, a design for a man she thought she could help build. The final structure had been a catastrophic failure, unable to bear the weight of its own ego. She folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. She felt no anger, no sadness. She felt only a quiet finality. He was a part of her history, a lesson in foundations, but he was not a part of her future. Eleanor stood up and walked to the large window overlooking the construction site. The steel beams, illuminated by powerful floodlights, reached for the night sky like a promise. That was her reality now. Solid, tangible, and rising. She did not need to answer Ethan's letter. Her answer was not in words, but in the steel and glass taking shape below. It was in her signature, on the blueprints, the only signature that mattered anymore. Her own. And so Ethan Blackwood's world, built on a foundation of lies, and someone else's fortune, came crashing down in the most public way imaginable. It's a stark reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way to the surface. Eleanor Vance's story isn't one of revenge, but of rediscovery. She reclaimed the power she had willingly given away, not to destroy her husband, but to finally build her own life. She proves that true strength isn't about the noise you make, but the solid foundation you build for yourself. What did you think of Ethan's karmic downfall? Was Eleanor's unveiling perfectly played? We all know someone who has underestimated a quiet, powerful person, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of karmic justice and female empowerment resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their own inner strength, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that uncover the truth and celebrate the triumph of the human spirit. Thank you for listening.